Story 1. The Crimson Tide of Hidden Lake Setting, Parsonsfield, Maine, Summer, 2024. In the quiet, pine-shrouded hamlet of Parsonsfield, Maine, nestled far from the clamor of city life, lived Thomas "Tom" Callahan, a rugged outdoorsman whose heart beat in rhythm with the wilderness. His modest cabin, perched on the edge of a sprawling forest, was a stone's throw from Hidden Lake, a secluded gem veiled by dense thickets and ancient oaks, untouched by the modern world. For over a decade, Tom had made this lake his sanctuary, its glassy waters yielding trout and solitude in equal measure. His kayak, a weathered but trusty vessel, was a permanent fixture by the lake's edge, propped against a gnarled tree, cloaked in a tarp to ward off the elements and curious critters. It was a sultry evening in late July, the kind where the air hung heavy with the scent of pine and the promise of a storm. Tom, his fishing gear slung over one shoulder and a cooler in hand, paddled out to the lake's center, the world fading to a symphony of lapping waves and distant loon calls. The sky, painted in hues of amber and violet, was surrendering to dusk as he cast his line, the rhythmic motion as natural to him as breathing. He'd already landed a few trout, their silvery bodies glinting in the cooler, when the tranquility shattered. From the shore, a peculiar sound, a low, metallic clank, cut through the evening's hush. Tom's eyes snapped to the source, and there, silhouetted against the fading light, stood a figure. Clad in dark clothing, the stranger was tipping a barrel over the water's edge, its contents spilling into the lake with an unnatural viscosity. The liquid, catching the last rays of twilight, gleamed a deep, ominous crimson, swirling into the clear water like blood in a vein. Tom's stomach churned. This wasn't just littering, it was desecration. "Hey!" Tom's voice boomed across the lake, sharp with indignation. "What the hell are you doing?" The figure froze, head jerking toward him. For a moment, their eyes locked, an unsettling, predatory gaze that sent a shiver down Tom's spine. Then, without a word, the stranger bolted into the woods, the barrel still leaking its sinister payload into the lake. Tom's heart pounded, a mix of anger and unease. He was no stranger to the woods, but this felt different, wrong. He paddled closer, peering at the water where the liquid had spread, its dark tendrils curling beneath the surface. The lake, once a mirror of serenity, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent secret. His instincts screamed to leave, but his love for this place, his sanctuary, compelled him to act. He'd report this to the Department of Environmental Protection, he decided, but first he needed to secure his kayak and get home. As he dragged the kayak ashore, his movements were hurried, the tarp thrown over it haphazardly. A snap, a twig breaking underfoot, echoed from the woods. Tom froze, his breath catching. The sound was too deliberate, too close. "Who's there?" he almost called, but fear clamped his lips shut. He grabbed his gear and cooler, his eyes darting to the shadowed tree line, and made for the path home, his pace quickening with every step. The forest, usually a comforting embrace, now felt like a predator closing in. Back at his cabin, Tom locked the door, a rare act in Parsonsfield's sleepy confines, and tried to shake the unease. He rinsed the trout, their cold scales grounding him, and heated leftovers, the microwave's hum a feeble attempt at normalcy. Then a knock, sharp and deliberate, rattled the front door. Tom's blood ran cold. Who would come calling at this hour, in this remote corner of Maine? The knock came again, followed by a voice, low and measured, seeping through the window. "Excuse me, I think you saw me at the lake. I just want to explain." Tom's mind raced. This wasn't a neighborly visit. This was the stranger, the polluter, tracking him to his home. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed the non-emergency police line, reporting the lake incident and the unwelcome visitor. The man knocked again, his voice growing insistent. "Open the door, sir. I'll explain everything." Tom's response was a bellowed threat. "Leave, or I call the cops." Silence followed, and after a tense minute, the knocking ceased. Tom locked every window, the air conditioning's hum drowning out the night's whispers, and filed an online report with the DEP. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams haunted by crimson waves. At 2 a.m., a crash jolted Tom awake. Glass shattered downstairs, the sound slicing through the cabin's stillness. He sprang from bed, heart hammering, and retrieved his Glock from the closet, its weight a cold comfort. Creaking footsteps ascended the stairs, slow and deliberate, each step a countdown to confrontation. Tom positioned himself behind the dresser, gun trained on the bedroom door. The knob turned, the door creaked open, and a silhouette filled the frame. A man, short and bearded, his glasses glinting in the dim light. In his hand, a small blade gleamed. Tom flicked on the lamp, the sudden light revealing the intruder's startled face. "Get on the ground!" Tom roared, his voice a thunderclap. The man raised his hands, the blade catching the light, and for a moment, he seemed to gesture for calm. "Drop it!" Tom barked. The man's voice was eerily calm. "I'm leaving," he said, then turned and bolted downstairs, his footsteps fading as he fled through the front door. Tom raced to lock the door, his eyes scanning the shattered living room window, glass strewn across the floor like a constellation of fear. He called 911, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. When the police arrived, he recounted the night's events, leading them to the lake where the barrel had been dumped. But the barrel was gone, erased from existence, leaving only Tom's word against the night's silence. He described the man, short, bearded, with a receding hairline and a black flannel shirt. But the police found no trace of him. Days turned to weeks, and Tom's life became a vigil. He repaired the window with his brother's help, their presence a temporary shield against the lingering dread. But the lake, once his refuge, was now a place of shadows. He couldn't shake the theory that the barrel held something far worse than chemicals, human remains perhaps, dissolved in acid to erase a crime. The stranger's pursuit, the break-in, the blade, all pointed to a desperate attempt to silence a witness. Tom installed security cameras, kept his Glock close, and avoided the lake, its waters forever stained in his mind with the crimson tide of that fateful night. Story 2. The Cult of the Fog Setting, Coastal Maine, Early Autumn. 1998, John Callahan, a stoic man with a fisherman's soul, had spent his life chasing the sea's bounty. Alongside his brother Matthew and their tight-knit crew, Rich, the seasoned navigator, Jeff, the group's jester, and Monty, the wild card, they'd carved out countless memories on the water. Their latest adventure took them to a remote cove off Maine's jagged coast, a place whispered about among anglers for its teeming bass and elusive pike. The cove, cradled by dense forest and shrouded in mist, was a 2-hour boat ride from the nearest marina, a world apart from civilization. The day began with the promise of perfection. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks as their boat sliced through the glassy water, the engine's hum mingling with laughter and the clink of Monty's early morning beer. They anchored in the cove, its forested shores a silent audience to their casts. Hours passed in a blur of catches and camaraderie, the men lost in the rhythm of the sea. But as dusk crept in, the air thickened, and a fog unlike any they'd seen rolled over the water, swallowing the boat in a ghostly embrace. Rich, whose instincts were honed by decades on the water, frowned at the fog's unnatural density. "Never seen it this thick," he muttered, his voice tinged with unease. Jeff and Monty, buoyed by alcohol, shrugged it off, but John and Matthew exchanged wary glances. The fog refused to lift, cloaking the cove in an oppressive haze. Attempts to navigate out nearly ended in disaster when Matthew grazed the rocky shore, his prized boat shuddering. Reluctantly, they agreed to spend the night, tethered to the cove's eerie silence. John, ever the pragmatist, insisted they contact their families. But the cove, a dead zone for cell signals, offered no mercy. Determined to find a signal, John volunteered to head ashore, joined by Rich and Jeff. Matthew stayed behind, guarding the boat and a now sleeping Monty. Armed with phone flashlights and emergency flares, the trio waded to shore, the cold water biting their legs. The forest loomed before them, its darkness amplified by the fog's suffocating presence. They trekked uphill, hoping elevation would yield a signal. The woods were unnaturally still, the fog weaving through the trees like a living entity. Then a sound, a sharp, rhythmic clicking, pierced the silence. It started ahead, then surrounded them, an erratic cadence that felt deliberate, human. John's pulse quickened. "What the hell is that?" Jeff whispered, his usual bravado gone. Rich, his face grim, hissed, "Turn off the lights. Now." In the sudden darkness, the clicking stopped, replaced by a silence that pressed against their chests. Minutes stretched into eternity, the men frozen, their breaths shallow. Then rustling, close, too close, followed by a scream, raw and guttural, that tore through the night. It was a sound of pure anguish, inhuman yet undeniably real. Panic seized them. "Run!" Rich shouted, and they bolted, branches clawing at their faces as they fled toward the shore. John, clutching the flare gun, fired behind them. The flare's red glow erupted, illuminating the forest for a fleeting moment and revealing a nightmare. A dozen figures, clad in tattered, tribal-like garments, stood among the trees. Some held crude spears, their faces obscured by the fog but their eyes glinting with feral intensity. Jeff stumbled, a scream escaping him, but Rich hauled him upright. The vision lasted seconds, but it burned into John's mind, a tableau of primal terror. They burst from the tree line, gasping, and screamed for Matthew to start the engine. The boat roared to life, pulling away as shadowy figures emerged at the water's edge. John fired the second flare skyward, its light revealing 15 motionless figures, their silhouettes stark against the fog. The boat sped into the night, the men silent, their breaths ragged. Monty, oblivious, slept through it all. They kept watch until dawn, the fog finally lifting to reveal a world that felt irrevocably changed. Back home, John recounted the ordeal to disbelieving family, his voice trembling with a fear he'd never known. The cove, once a haven, was now a place of dread, its secrets guarded by the fog and the silent, spear-wielding watchers who haunted his dreams. Story 3, The Lake's Buried Secret Setting, Upstate New York, April 2024. At 60, Frank Sullivan was a man of the land, his life etched in the lines of his weathered face and the calluses of his hands. Upstate New York, with its endless lakes and rolling hills, was his kingdom, and fishing was his religion. His children had long since flown the nest, leaving his farmhouse quiet, save for the creak of floorboards and the hum of memories. Fishing filled the void, whether with old college buddies or, more often alone, a solitary communion with the water. In mid-April, with the ice just melted and the lakes stirring to life, Frank sought a new challenge. He chose a small, unnamed lake deep in the Adirondacks, far from the beaten path. The drive, under a sky bruised with dawn's first light, was a pilgrimage. He unstrapped his kayak, its hull scarred from decades of adventures, and paddled to the lake's heart, the silence broken only by the dip of his paddle and the chorus of waking birds. The morning was crisp, the lake a mirror reflecting the sky's shifting colors. Frank, his gear meticulously arranged, cast for largemouth bass, his wacky-rigged worm dancing beneath the surface. He was lost in the ritual when movement caught his eye across the lake, a flicker of activity at the water's edge. At first he assumed it was another angler, but curiosity tugged at him. He retrieved his binoculars, a relic from birdwatching days, and focused on the scene. 3 figures, cloaked in dark hoods, were digging at the shore. Their movements were methodical, almost ritualistic. Frank's breath hitched as they finished the hole, not to bury, but to unearth. One by one, they pulled objects from the earth, their shapes indistinct but heavy with purpose. Then, with deliberate care, they hurled the items into the lake, each splash echoing like a gunshot. Frank's gut twisted. This wasn't fishing or camping. This was something sinister. Fear crept into his bones, but Frank's stubborn streak held firm. He waited until the figures vanished into the woods, their departure marked by the rustle of leaves. Paddling to the spot, his hands trembled, the kayak gliding silently over the water's secrets. He cast his line, not for fish, but for answers, his hook probing the depths. An hour passed with no success, frustration mounting. Then inspiration struck. He remembered his depth checker, stowed in his car. The trek back to shore was a blur, his pulse racing as he retrieved the device. Back on the water, he probed the lake bottom, the checker's weight sinking into the silt. Then a hit, something solid, metallic. Marking the spot, Frank swapped his rig for a heavy hook, his decades of experience guiding his hands. The line snagged, and with agonizing care, he reeled in his catch. What emerged was a black 9mm pistol, its surface slick with lake water, glinting malevolently in the morning light. Frank's blood ran cold. This was no discarded relic. It was evidence, a piece of a darker puzzle. He didn't linger to search for more. Paddling to shore, he called the police, his voice steady despite the dread gnawing at him. The authorities descended on the lake, their divers recovering a chilling haul, a keychain with 7 keys, a bundle of foreign coins wrapped in cloth, and a locket, its faded photos locked in a watery grave. Each item was a question mark, a fragment of a crime Frank could only imagine. Weeks later, the incident lingered like a shadow. One night, as Frank sat in his farmhouse, the silence was broken by voices outside. "That's the car," one said, low and urgent. Footsteps circled the house, probing, searching. Frank's heart pounded, his hand closing around the shotgun by his chair. The intruders never knocked, never entered, but their presence was a warning. He reported it to the police, but no leads emerged. The lake, the gun, the hooded figures, they haunted him, a mystery buried in the Adirondack depths, watching, waiting. Story 4, The Night Stalker of the Jersey Shore Setting. Jersey Shore, October 2022. For Jake Russo, a 20-something with a restless spirit, the summer of 2022 was defined by fishing. The hobby, sparked by his friend Kevin's infectious passion, had consumed him, drawing him and his buddies, Kevin and Arian, to the family's shore house on the Jersey coast. The house, perched by a lagoon, was a relic of decades past, its dock home to a Boston whaler that had seen better days. When the boat was sidelined for repairs, they turned to the beaches and piers, chasing striped bass under the autumn sky. It was a crispy October weekend when the trio piled into Jake's car, rods and coolers in tow, bound for the shore house. Friday's fishing was lackluster, yielding only a small base for Kevin. Determined to redeem the trip, they decided to fish through the night, targeting a secluded beach Kevin swore was a striper hotspot. The drive took them down a desolate road, flanked by woods that seemed to swallow the moonlight. The gravel lot at the road's end was empty, a lonely outpost in the darkness. Loaded with gear, chairs, a speaker, coolers of snacks and beer, they trekked 5 minutes to the beach, a vast expanse of sand stretching into the night. They set up camp, hammering rod holders into the sand and clipping bells to the rod's tips. The music blared, a defiant anthem against the solitude, and within hours each had landed a fish, their spirits soaring. Laughter and beer flowed freely, the night alive with possibility. Then Arian froze, silencing the music. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his eyes scanning the darkness. Someone yelled, "Yo," or "Hey." Jake and Kevin, skeptical, dismissed it as the wind or imagination, but the moment sharpened their senses. Minutes later, as Jake cast a fresh hook, a shape emerged from the shadows, a figure moving along the beach, growing larger, closer. The man, middle-aged with a dark jacket and hood, approached with a predator's gait. His face, half hidden, bore a hard, unreadable expression. "What's up?" Jake ventured, his voice tight. The man said nothing, his eyes raking over them, the rods, the water. After an agonizing silence, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "What are you boys up to?" Kevin, unfazed, replied, "Fishing." The man grunted, nodding, but didn't move, his presence a weight on the night. The bell on a rod jingled, breaking the tension. "We got one," Jake called, moving to reel in a striper. When he turned back, the man was gone, his silhouette fading into the darkness. Relief washed over them, tempered by unease. They killed the music, their conversation turning to the stranger's oddity. He was gone, they reasoned, just a weird loner. But the night had other plans. An hour later, as Jake stared at the horizon, a sound shattered the calm, a car alarm, unmistakably his. Panic surged. Their car, alone in the lot, was miles from help. Leaving their gear, they sprinted back, the path a gauntlet of shadows. At the lot, Jake's worst fears materialized. His tires were slashed, The driver's window a jagged hole. His wallet, cash, and Kevin's spare gear were gone. Jake called the police, his voice shaking as he recounted the stranger's visit. As he spoke, rustling erupted in the woods around them, a chorus of unseen threats. "He's still here," Arian whispered, his face pale. They fled, scrambling 200 yards down the road to hide among the trees, hearts pounding as they waited for rescue. Within minutes, police lights pierced the night, officers swarming the lot. They found a knife near the car, its blade glinting with menace, and took it for evidence. The officers drove them back to the shore house, helping gather their abandoned gear. "You did the right thing running," one said. "That guy likely meant you harm." The words hung heavy, a reminder of how close they'd come to danger. Jake's car was towed, the repairs costing hundreds, but the true cost was the loss of his passion. Fishing, once a joy, was now a memory tainted by fear. The stranger never caught lingered in Jake's mind, a specter of the night that changed everything.